Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the broadcast this evening. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. What a happy week. What a happy day. I suppose you are going to ask me, what is this all about?
I was about to say that, sir.
Nobody is celebrating a birthday, but I want our compatriots on this platform to join me in raising a glass of champagne to that profession which we often criticize, which we often misunderstand. And I'm talking about diplomats. Diplomats. When Sweden and Finland applied to join NATO, and the president of Turkey said, no way, he wasn't gonna allow it. They even offered to fly down to see him in his capital. And he said, don't waste your time, don't bother to come. And yet, at the last minute, that memorandum of understanding was signed, where Turkey said she will no longer raise any objection to their membership. And this is what diplomats do all the time. There is always the form of words which they will come up with that will perform the miracle. We often don't give them credit for that. And also, the second one announced today, where Russia and Ukraine, surprise, surprise, decided to agree to the evacuation of Ukrainian wheat to feed the rest of the world. On the side of Russia was UNCTAD, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. And on the Ukrainian side was a special representative of the Secretary General. And in the middle, now holding their hands, pushing them toward that handshake, come on, come on, come on, was Turkey. And they got that agreement. Again, United Nations, much aligned, much misunderstood, much criticized, and there it is, played that role of being a peacemaker. And you've got to give it to Turkey. I hope we will have time in this program to talk more about Turkey. But this was a medium power country, aligned, a member of NATO. And as the president of Turkey has often said, he has never broken any NATO agreement on Russia, and yet is trusted by the Russians and Turkey that is able to play this mediatory role. No, man, diplomats deserve a glass or two of champagne at the beginning of this program. Thank you. A long introduction from me.
I see where you're going with that, sir. But let me play another side of that, sir, because some may ask the question. Yes, we're celebrating diplomacy and how that has been able to make some changes. But someone could ask the question, where was diplomacy when the war was about to start? Where was diplomacy before people started dying in Ukraine? Where was diplomacy before the missiles started flying? How would you respond to that person? Because yes, now we can see diplomacy working, but it didn't avert the deaths. It didn't avert, and it hasn't stopped it. So I'd like for you to help us to balance those two things, the small victory you've highlighted and the real big defeats there.
Where were the angels when heaven was being created? Where were the angels when sinners all of a sudden showed up on earth after creation? Where was the judiciary and the police when prisons were being created? They are not performing miracles. They don't score 100%, but they don't score 0%. Unfortunately, we have been created. It's in our DNA to be a very disagreeable creation of the Lord, so that when we even see the right road, we still turn left. Of course, you may then ask, why did the Creator create the right road and the left road? If not that he was going to allow some people to take the wrong road. So the diplomats will not perform miracles, but given what they have to work with, which is human beings, praise them when they succeed.
Okay, I agree to that. That very philosophical response. It looks like we'll need someone who is a doctor of philosophy to help us to distill your response.
Or a doctor of theology.
Of theology, maybe even, to help us.
Yes.
But you do raise an important point, sir. Are we seeing this confluence of events that has then led to diplomacy working effectively, in the sense that Russia was disadvantaged when it came to food and grain? Ukraine was disadvantaged. The rest of the world was disadvantaged. And therefore, that made it easier for the conversation to take place. Whereas at the early stage of the war, Russia was the aggressor, the one that we hadn't really seen their capability in war in a while, in the sense, and everybody had thought Ukraine was going to be overrun within a matter of days. So is it that situation where everybody was disadvantaged and we're now saying, let's sit down, let's talk?
Yes, you are quite right. For diplomacy to work, there must be a confluence of national interests. I love something that President Erdogan of Turkey, not that I cannot say Turkey, but they've changed their name, that they don't want to be referred to as that Christmas chicken anymore. So they call themselves Turkey now. Erdogan said, diplomacy is not a zero-sum game. That reminds me of when I used to try to explain the theory, the concept of game theory to my students at the University of Ibadan. That means diplomacy is I win, you lose. On the contrary, diplomacy is a multiple sum game. I win some, you win some, I lose some, you lose some, but we all walk away with having gained something. It's only when that confluence takes place that diplomacy works. So you are quite right that in this specific game of the export of grains to the rest of the world, everybody had something to lose and everybody has something to gain. And I will not be surprised if I were a fly on the wall listening to that discussion between Turkey and Putin. I would not be surprised if Erdogan hasn't said to Putin, look, everybody hates you in the world. Everybody thinks you are a devil. Why not do something that you can say, see, I'm not as bad as you guys think, and some credits from the rest of the world, who then may even put pressure on Ukraine to say, well, look at this rational behavior on the side of that man. And Putin probably said, well, I think you are right. In any case, his military occupation of that Snake Island, where the grains are going to be evacuated, had become untenable. He occupied it at the beginning of the war, but he had hoped that by now he would have been able to surround it and get to Odessa and link up with the troops on Snake Island. But unfortunately, that hasn't taken place because the Ukrainian soldiers have fought with hearts of lion. So he now says, I'm withdrawing my troops from that island as a gesture of good faith to the rest of the world. Whereas, in fact, his troops were on the point of probably being decimated, given the new weapons that are now arriving, in Ukraine. So I could see how Turkey played that very well. This is what you have to gain if you agree with us. So you are right. You are right.
One other point to look at, sir. When this Turkey raised its first objection on the grounds that Sweden and Finland were harboring militia that they regarded as terrorist groups, the West was taken by surprise at such a request. Would you say they were right in what they said at that point? And is the shift from those two countries signifying that indeed there was something to have been addressed in that place, and Turkey was right in that demand? Or is it the pressure to join NATO that pushed those countries to eventually accept that, look, we're going to accept that position, we're going to give up some territory so we can join NATO? Or do you think Turkey was right?
No, I'm sorry. I think you are probably thinking of Georgia when you are talking about giving up territory. Finland and Sweden did not involve territorial issues. It was Turkey insisting that Finland and Sweden have been given refuge to what Turkey called terrorists, Turkish terrorists. and that granting them asylum, allowing them to operate from their territories against the interests of Turkey, and that has to be stopped. And when you find yourself in a situation where you hold some power over the head of your opponent, and that involves issues which you have been pressing for, you use that power to try and extract gains from the other side. In this particular case, the power that Turkey held over Sweden and Finland was the fact that to admit a new member into NATO has to be unanimity of agreement among members of NATO. Therefore, each NATO member holds the power of veto. And Turkey said she was prepared to veto that. Now, the rest of NATO wasn't going to allow them to exercise that power. So it's like, look, let's have what it will take you not to exercise that power of veto. Now, some analysts have said that Sweden and Finland are paying a heavy price to secure the compliance of Turkey. And what was that heavy price? That Sweden and Holland had been known as a haven for refugees, a haven for people flying from persecution. And now they are going to have to give up that traditional power that traditional status of being haven. And my reaction to this is this. I do understand, right? I do understand that given the nature of regimes in the world with unsavory characters as persecutors, you need countries where they can run to and find safety, find refuge, find peace. I agree with that. But you need to ask, you see, the problem with we human beings is we don't often know where to draw the line. We end up from seeking safety to abusing the safety you are granted by now mounting operations against the country where you are running from. Now, I could speak on this with authority because I was a member of NADECO, the National Democratic Coalition that waged not a war, because if I use the term war, you will be thinking of guns, that waged a struggle against a military regime. And in spite of pressure on us to turn that struggle from being peaceful to an armed struggle, we refused, we resisted. But what we did was to wear down the patience of our government by demonstrating, by bringing to the attention of the world misdeeds by the military regime, violations of human rights, violation of the rule of law, and all those kind of things. So we kept within the law. Because I was interviewed twice by MI5 in England, saying, look, we know you people are here. I hope, and they will say to me, I hope you understand that British law does not permit you to become involved in activities that may get you expelled from Britain, another kind of thing. So in a way, I interpret, I'm always looking on the bright side. I interpret the memorandum of understanding signed on one hand by Turkey, on the other hand by Finland. And Finland? Yes, Finland and Sweden. I understand that memorandum to be that there is a responsibility on the part of Finland and Sweden to make sure that Turkish refugees on their territories do not go beyond that law that grants them refugee status, and that they cannot then cross that red line to start active hostile activities. Like everything else, it now depends on how you are going to start interpreting, different clauses in that memorandum. So that's my own understanding of that memorandum. But one particular article in that memorandum worries me, however, and that is where Turkey is supposed to hand over a list of, I think, 70 or 75 refugees, which are then supposed to be deported back to Turkey. That bothers me. But I suppose at the end of the day, international lawyers will get involved and probably again arrive at an understanding that no, they can be deported to a neutral country that does not share the same boundary with Turkey. That's really what that means. And not that we are going to hand over 75 souls to you to then go and torture, probably execute, or sentence to life imprisonment. That article, however, bothers me.
Thank you, sir. You talk about illegal immigration there. And before I go to your reaction to the G7 summit, there was a piece of news that was released today where the British government was saying that they had struck a deal with Nigeria to tackle shared illegal immigration. Now, some people may be worried that is this another Rwanda type situation that's beginning to develop here? What is your take on that, sir?
No. I am aware of the agreement between the British and Nigeria. What it calls for is that Britain and a simple international law that Britain can deport back to Nigeria Nigerians who enter Britain illegally. It is in execution of that law that Britain, actually, I think today, they've already deported 67 or 65, Nigerians. Britain is not breaking the law, and Nigeria is not breaking the law. And it's a totally different concept of deportation from what happened between, Iran, between Rwanda and Britain. And don't forget, actually, this thing has been going on for years, not between Britain and Nigeria, but Nigeria has been sending air peace to evacuate Nigerians from Libya, from South Africa, from even Ukraine. Well, some people have said, and I believe them, that wherever you have a country in the world, you're going to find a Nigerian there, whether he entered peacefully, legally, or illegally. There are now times when it becomes an issue, and lives of Nigerians are then at risk. And Nigeria simply sends a plane or two to evacuate them. Really, but it's just because between Britain and Nigeria, we have a system, and it's that system that is being put into operation here.
I will come back to the point on immigration, sir, because there was a situation in North Africa that I want to get your reaction to. But before we go there, let's talk about the G7 summit and some of the items in the communique that was released at the end of the summit. Many are not surprised that Russia, the war with Ukraine, would have dominated that. But one of the key things we saw, sir, was even more sanctions on Russia. And some have continued to argue that sanctions don't work, and the sanctions haven't stopped Russia from doing what Russia is doing. What is your reaction to that element of what was released at the end of the summit in terms of sanctions on Russia, sir?
Well, I've got two responses to that. Number one, I think we should stop saying sanctions don't work. Sanctions do work. Again, as a foreign minister, where we pursued this policy of sanctions against apartheid South Africa, what finally changed South Africans, the mind of the apartheid regime, to now negotiate with Nelson Mandela was because of one, pressure on their currency, the rand. Businessmen don't like uncertainty about certain economic factors. And pretty soon, you will see being reflected on the value of your currency. Number two, the value of shares on your stock exchange. They tend to fall. You lose, it's not. You see, I think people think sanctions is like an injection. So the moment you plunge the needle in, the fever goes away. Or in the case of sanctions, the moment you plunge the needle in, the patient collapses and that kind of thing. No, sanctions make an incremental effect on your economy. After all, Russian oil is being sold at a discount to India, to China, and to some other countries. What people are expecting is that Russian economy will collapse like that. They absolutely not. So sanctions do work. Second point to make is, I don't understand I disagree with the strategy of incremental sanctions regime against Russia. It's as if the Western leaders have bought into the, Chinese torture regime of death by 1,000 cuts. Rather than decapitating the head, you cut a little bit of flesh at a time. You still kill the fellow, but then the fellow is alive for 1,000 cuts before he dies. In the meantime, Ukraine is being pulverized. Cities are being destroyed. So why this incremental? I've raised it on this program before. The incremental strategy by the West not only applies to sanctions against Russia, it also applies to the nature of weapons and the quantity of weapons which they give the Ukrainians. I was listening to an MP, a member of parliament of Ukraine, saying they pledged to give them 3, I've forgotten what the name of the equipment was. He said 3, not 30, not 300. We need 3,000. They promised to give us 3. He said, but in any case, we are thankful for the 3. It's better than 0. I don't understand the adoption of that, but really, I've never understood the strategy of the West in this Russian-Ukrainian war. I totally agree with them on drawing a red line where they will not go so that they don't provoke a war between NATO and Russia. That I agree with, but I think they're a long time they're a long way from that red line. And that is why each time they could make an incremental jump. But in the meantime, it's Ukraine that is being destroyed.
Thank you, sir. Let us look at one more point there, and I want to link that to a ruling by the US Supreme Court. And this is when we start to look at the commitments of the G7 to climate change and to the goals that had been put in place. And one of the things that they said in the communique, sir, was this, that they noted with concern that currently neither global ambition nor implementation is sufficient to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. And they're looking to put more funding in. But on the other hand, we have the challenge in the United States, where the Supreme Court has ruled against the ability of the government to implement some of these initiatives that would help to drive the United States closer to the goal. Do you see that ruling impacting the position of the United States in being able to support this kind of climate agreements?
Yes and no. Definitely, the ruling of the court clips the wings of federal agencies to implement without legislation, to implement some of the climatic changes, or to implement climatic provisions that are needed in order for the US to be faithful to its commitments. So that is, but to say that is an implied castigation of the governance of the United States itself. If I knew you were going to ask me this question, I probably would have revealed, my memory. But there are two cases. I can only remember one, which I will cite. I can't remember the second one. But they arrived at the same conclusion. The one I can remember is Attorney General of Canada versus Attorney General of Ontario, where the Supreme Court of Canada said, in execution of your commitment under an international convention, the government of Canada can actually exercise powers which under the Constitution it doesn't have. So in other words, you cannot break your commitment under an international convention simply because your Constitution says no. A similar decision was reached by the United States Supreme Court in almost a similar case. What the Supreme Court of the United States is saying is this. There are some of these conventions that need to be ratified, either ratified by Congress or Congress has to pass specific legislation empowering the agency to exercise that power. And that without either, I am interpreting the decision now, the Supreme Court decision. I'm not using their exact words. But to give you an illustration, the reason why Trump was able to pull out of the Paris Treaty was because Obama never took it to the Senate. He knew the Senate would not approve of it, so he never took it to the Senate for ratification. So he stayed in that nebulous, parameter of a convention America has signed on to, but has not, if you like, domesticated through their legislation. It just then became implied that all these federal agencies have the power to do what they were doing. And what this conservative court is doing is really, you see, the American Supreme Court has become like the Supreme Court of Nigeria. They've become elementary, instead of becoming postgraduate Supreme Court lawyers, they've gone back to, primary school. The Constitution must say this before we will take it on. They could easily have asked a contrary question. Does the Constitution actually prohibit this? Instead of looking for, does the Constitution allow it? If the Constitution does not allow it, but you think it makes sense. I mean, after all, this Constitution was written in 1776, I think. How many years now? 300 years or that kind of thing? There's no way that, farmers or property owners sitting in Philadelphia in 1776 could have thought of the conditions that we are facing in the world today, so as to now write everything down, unless they are prophets or seers. So you then look for whether, if they are thought about it, they will have prohibited it. That is what the Supreme Court is not just for law, it's for justice as well, and for wisdom. But when you have, lawyers appointed to the court who don't want to think, they just want to read. Is it there? No, it's not there. We strike it down. So now, as long as you are confronted with this court, the American executive will now have to take all their agreements, all their international agreements to the Senate for ratification. And if you have a hostile Senate on your hand, then in a way you are not going to get the cooperation that you need to interact with others in the world. I'm not sure whether there was a second question or not.
No, that I think you picked them, sir. Before I talk about NATO, I want to get your reaction to a comment by the Spanish Prime Minister. And there was a lot of concern by the foreign minister in terms of the presence of Russia in North Africa, and the fact that that presence has been increasing in North Africa. What should that worry African leaders, given what is going on in Ukraine? Should they be concerned with the increasing presence of Russian forces in that area, sir, according to the Spanish foreign minister?
Well, you should know what is referring to Russian forces in Mali, Russian forces in the West Central African Republic, but presumably he was referring to Mali and Libya. And this is a song we've been hearing for quite a while, because not only France, but Portugal, Spain, even the United States feel that they're encroaching on, their spheres of influence. So it's nothing new, and you must prepare your mind to continue to hear this as the war in Ukraine and the fragmentation of the world order into two now parallel ones diminish the ability of especially the European countries to continue to exercise influence and authority in their former areas. You must prepare your mind to continue to hear that.
All right, so thank you, sir. Let's now go to and talk about NATO a little bit and some of the developments from the NATO summit that's just taken place. We know that one of the key reasons for this war was because Russia was opposed to the expansion of NATO. Now we're seeing a route cleared for Sweden and Finland to join NATO. We continue to hear Zelensky talking about Ukraine joining NATO. But the exact opposite seems to have happened to Russia now with those two countries that may be joining NATO. What should be the Russian response, sir, to Sweden and Finland joining NATO? What do you expect that to be, given what's going on?
I don't know. I have no answer to that. What I know is that he cannot invade. He cannot invade. Simply because, although as President Erdogan said in his press conference, there are countries who have been on the waiting list for over 9 years, that it doesn't mean that Sweden is going to become a member of NATO before the end of this year or even next year. That the process is a long one, but I think assurances have been given to those two countries, especially by Britain, and I think with a nod by the US, that any attack on them will provoke military retaliation by some members of NATO. Because remember, at the press conference by Biden, he kept reiterating Article 5. An attack on one is an attack on all. So I presume he already is including, even though formally and legally, Holland and Finland and Sweden are not legally, strictly census members of NATO. They are practically will be treated as, members. So Putin doesn't have the option of invasion, of attacking them. You could not look at trade areas, economic areas, where it could make life difficult for Finland and Sweden. Finland especially, he could activate Russian speakers who are in Finland. He could engineer them to begin acts of subversion and just create internal problems for the government there. I don't think there are Russian speakers in Sweden, but the trade in the world is interconnected now, that probably he will be looking for what tap he could turn off. But apart from that, no. What is even of more, what is of more interest, or which we should be looking at? I don't know whether you have it on your list, is the commitment by Russia, China, and Brazil, and other members of BRICS to develop an alternative payment system to what exists with the World Bank and the IMF. That, to me, is what is going to shake the world order, and not what will happen to Sweden or happen to Finland.
The Spanish Prime Minister said something at the NATO conference. He said NATO members have been naive in their relations with Russia. Do you agree with that, sir?
I agree. This question of Ukraine could have been solved a long time ago by a flexibility. At times, this is what is wrong with democracy and diplomacy. In dealing with issues that demand fast tracking, if you are operating a democratic government, and especially where it is an alliance, a coalition, the issue then gets roped up with domestic politics. Because 10 years ago, you could have admitted Ukraine. Ukraine applied. Russia at that time was not thinking of an invasion. In any case, and you could then have said, all right, we give you interim admission, or we give you associate admission while you are tidying up. It's the same criticism we can make of European Union. But there was this insistence on hard lines being drawn of areas you must address, and these are issues you must come to a conclusion with before they will then consider your application. And that is really what but they will reply that they never in their wildest dreams think Putin would do what he has done. But there were people who were warning Germany, who were warning European countries about their dependence on gas and fuel from Russia, and that they were empowering Russia to play the diplomacy of fuel or aggression by fuel. There were people who are calling the attention to that. But at times, politicians don't like people who think far into the future. They want to think of today. What factors can they activate that will help them win the next election? But thinking 10 years, 15 years, 20 years down the line, politicians don't like people who do that. But with hindsight, now the Spanish Prime Minister who said that they underrated Putin. What was the position of even his own country 15 years ago?
Thank you, sir. We have about 5 minutes left. Okay. And I know that there was a time you used to play tennis. And there's a particular event that is on in the United Kingdom. Let's call it, there is some sports diplomacy that may be going on, sir. What is your take about Wimbledon and what's going on there, the players? Unfortunately, one of our key men in the UK has dropped out today. In fact, two key players. But what is your take on Wimbledon, sir?
Well, each time there is something I used to do, you always like to remind me how old I am now. Oh, you used to play tennis at one time. You used to ride horses at one time. And now I'm just a software analyst of the moves by others.
Age is in the mind, sir.
Oh, no. Let me assure you, age is not in the mind. Wait until you get to my age, you will know. It's you young ones who often say that. No, I mean, I think we can agree that Wimbledon is the royalty of tennis. All the others, the French Open, the American Open, follow closely. But Wimbledon is the royalty of it. That green court, especially the first week, it looks so green. And the skill of what you say there, it reminds you of what the human body is capable of when it is at its best. But it's a pity when one's favorites gets knocked off at the beginning. I was rooting, of course, I know you know that. I was rooting for Serena to come back, and then let us see that display on the courts again. But I'm afraid, you tell her that age is in the mind, and she'll tell you what she feels on that court as she runs, while the 18-year-olds, are dribbling her all over the court. It's a season of joy. Let me put it that way. I mean, there's so much bad news in the world that is good. Just sit there with, a bowl of strawberries and a glass of champagne, and you don't have to do anything except just sit and watch. I wish them luck. I wish them luck. And already I'm looking forward to the American Open and see what happens there.
Excellent, sir. But even in the sports arena, sir, we've had some Nigerian athletes that have just been banned for substances. What kind of effect does that have on our diplomacy when this kind of news comes out? I know there was one about Russia a while ago. Now we're hearing about Nigeria and some of our athletes who are involved in this. What does that do to the image of the country?
Well, you see, thank God that it's not just people from the global south who get accused of these things, or else the whole continent will have been banned from Olympics or World Cup or whatever it is. Actually, there are more complaints about the global north, and that is what has them proved. Because you cannot kick America out of Olympics, you will lose so much money that the sport will no longer be profitable to people who make profit out of it. But it hurts when it happens. It's a disaster for the athlete, but she should have known better. But it has a worse effect when it is a team event. Because of the misdemeanor of one person, a whole team gets punished. The Nigerian relay team, I think 440 or so, had qualified for the World Championships taking place in the United Kingdom, I think next month or so, would qualified. But because she was one of the quartet, and she's been banned for 11 years now, that whole team was then disqualified. So the greed of one person, other innocent souls have had to pay for that. People who did not commit any offense, who played by the rules, they've now had to also be punished for, because of it's unfortunate. Thank God it's not the Olympics. Hopefully we will have put together another team and drum it into their heads. You see, all these people, they train in the United States, not in Nigeria. And therefore, they're exposed, to that culture. Again, it's like that basketball American in Russia who was found with cannabis oil in her bag. What are you doing in Russia? What are you doing in Russia? And if you are going there, why go with banned substance and then hope that, your country will get you out, not foreseeing that there was going to be a war of which you yourself may become a victim. There tends to be some greed and selfishness on the part of athletes. They think they are now superheroes. Well, you may be a hero, but you are not a superhuman being that should not abide by the law, either of the country where you are living or the country where you are visiting. I think our athletes, not just Nigerian athletes, I'm talking about athletes at home, because you recall the problem over COVID-19 vaccination by one of the grade A tennis players who still insists today that he's not going to take the vaccination. Well, let him sit at home. I'm opposed to even bending the rule to allow him to take part. Our athletes should calm down. They should calm down. They are earning so much money that is gone into their heads that they are above the law. Well, they are not above the law. And I hope that just because of the money that organizers and owners of these clubs are making, they shouldn't be bending the laws for these athletes.
Thank you very much, sir. We've run out of time for tonight. But next week, sir, I'd like to hear your views on the January 6th hearing and some of the things that have, the revelations that have come out of that, and what your views would be on which way now for the United States, right? Is this just going to be, yes, a lot of revelations, but what changes would you expect to see to stop this kind of thing from happening again? But we'll do that. We'll start with that next week, sir, when we start the program. And on that note, we'll end the program tonight. Thank you very much, sir, once again for being here. And to our viewers, thank you all for being here. See you next week. Good night, sir.